Diamonds. We've all seen them, we know what they look like, but so few of us actually understand what they're about. Unless you deal with diamonds on a daily basis, you probably have a good bit of confusion when it comes to understanding diamond criteria, and more importantly, how that diamond criteria actually translates to value. We're going to talk about the big 4 C's today of diamond criteria, and we're also going to talk about the more practical and relevant aspects of diamonds if you're ever looking to buy one. Stay with me. Hey, Andrew here again, your average jeweler. This is where we talk about general jewelry questions, the things that the average person won't necessarily understand, and yet, if you take a little time, you can learn something about it. Today, we're talking about diamonds, and no, this is not a real diamond. You probably spotted that right off, but it surprises me how many people come into our store and look at these and ask if they're real. This little guy I have here, I say little in comparison to this. If this was a diamond, this would be a famous diamond. This would be a massive diamond, not the biggest in the world, but compared to this, if you ever see this in someone's showcase or on their counter, just assume it's not a diamond. Maybe they have some quartz crystals cut out like that, but I think it's interesting a lot of people's conceptions about how massive diamonds can actually be. Which brings me into a little bit of my intro to what I'm doing, and that would be diamonds themselves. While a lot of people talk about how diamonds aren't really rare these days, they don't understand that diamonds that people want are incredibly rare. And the nicer a diamond is, the more rare and the harder to find in those qualities the diamond gets. If you want to go out and buy a diamond for really inexpensive because you believe that they're not even rare, you can find diamonds for very little cost. They just don't look like diamonds that we think about today. So when we want to buy a diamond, with everyone out there that wouldn't mind having a pretty diamond, there has to be a way of figuring out how do we value these. And that's where the 4 C's come into play. And the 4 C's, as they're called, was actually established back in, I believe, the 40s. I'm not sure about my timeline, but it was GIA, the Gemological Institute of America, who started talking about how do we make some kind of an objective scale to identify the quality of diamonds. Because everybody wanted a nice diamond, and so how do we designate which ones are worth more than others so that we can make this a more objective system? So GIA went about developing what we know today as the 4 C's. And while other people have accepted the same jargon and the same verbiage, it's not always the same across all boards. And that's one thing I want to talk about before we get into those criteria, is that there is in fact subjectivity to them. And I'm not just talking about the weight of the stone, which we'll get into, or the fact that you would think you could objectify a specific color. I'm talking more about different labs even, and especially different jewelers, will have their own standards when it comes to grading diamonds. And that's where you need to be a bit careful. For our purposes, we often choose to use GIA graded stones because we know that we're comparing apples to apples. If you were to compare a GIA graded stone to a lab like, we'll say, EGL, you're going to find they grade things very differently. And even though on paper, the EGL stone may look like a better diamond, when someone who understands diamonds looks at those two stones, they're going to find out the EGL stone is graded to a much lower degree, and while on paper, the GIA stone looks to be a lower grade stone, very often that's not the case. So I want you to have a little heads up into that, because again, this is one area where people start to understand diamonds, and yet they miss some of these key components if and when they start to actually shop for a diamond. So keep in mind, while the scales are meant to bring a more scientific nature to diamond grading, depending on who does the grading, you may find that there's a difference. And that's why getting a diamond, when you're getting a larger diamond especially, with some kind of a lab report is valuable, but knowing which lab report and the reputation of that lab is just as valuable. Because again, on paper, you may think you're getting a better deal, when in fact you're just getting a lower quality diamond that's been inflated on paper, and the report doesn't really reflect the quality of the stone. I know that that's not what you expected to get into right off. I think it's super important if you want to understand diamonds and how they value them and how to objectively look at one. So now, what you're probably all here for, and that is the 4 main C's of diamond grading. We're not doing these in any real specific order, but we're going to start with number 1, and that is color. Now maybe you've seen some actual colored diamonds where they're pink or blue or green or red. A lot of them are irradiated because nice colored natural diamonds are pretty rare, but when you get into natural colored diamonds, you're usually going to see browns and yellows. Those are the most common natural colors to find a diamond in. But most people are not talking about that. When we talk about the 4 C's of diamonds, we're usually talking about white or colorless diamonds. And color in that scale actually starts at D. It starts at D and it goes all the way to Z, which is when you start getting into more of those fancy colored diamonds at that point. But to most people, Z is going to still be a bit dingy in comparison. It's not going to be those vivid yellows that we think about. So let's keep over at the more colorless side of things. That's what most people are looking for. The average person, when they look for a diamond, they want something that looks nice and white. Again, it's the dinginess, the muddiness that people try to avoid. And they start at D. D is colorless, or it should be. Why do they not start at A? That's more simple than you might think. The older diamond grading systems often used A, B, C, AA, BB. They had these interesting alphabetic systems to try and designate a diamond quality. When GIA started figuring out their system, they knew that it might be confusing for someone to see A quality or B quality on something that they looked at. For the sake of clarity, they decided to start at the letter D. D is colorless. If you look at most diamond charts, D, E, F are considered colorless, while E and F do have a slight amount of color to them. G through J, many people consider them near colorless. And K through M, you have some faint yellow, so on and so forth. I don't want to get too nitpicky into this, but I do want to help you understand the general idea of what these colors are in comparison one to the next. Because one color grade to the next, the average person can't really notice it to the naked eye. When you start to see 2, 3, and particularly 4 color grades apart, the average person can definitely pick up on that. Again, diamond grading is meant to be a very finite scale because you're choosing among a smaller range of stones many times. So they want this scale to be very tight, and we're going to talk at the end of this video how that relates to finding, we'll say, the best bang for your buck. We'll get into that later. But color, you start at D and you work your way to the end of the alphabet as it gets more and more color in there. So we're covering a lot in diamonds today, and I hope by the time that you finish with this, you have a much better understanding of how these things all work together within diamond grading. But when you purchased a diamond, or maybe the last person you know purchased a diamond, what were some of the things that were important to them? Was it all about the price and they felt like they were just shopping for a good deal? Which I'll say shopping around for diamonds is difficult. I'll talk about that more. But what is it that they were looking for? What was important to them out of these criteria? Was it the color? Was it the cut? Was it the clarity? Or was it the size? Was it the weight of the stone? I want to know. I like to hear all this feedback. Please let me know in the comments down below, and we can keep this conversation going a bit. Now, diamond clarity may be the biggest influencer in diamond value. That's not always the case, but clarity is very important. And that has to do with how internally clean is that diamond. When I pick this up, this is a very clean stone because it's not actually a gemstone. It is glass. And when we look at a diamond, many times there are going to be imperfections in that stone, and those imperfections can look like a lot of different things. Sometimes they look like a feather, which is what they call it. Other times it looks more crack-like. Sometimes it looks like pieces of salt. And any of those imperfections can take away from what most people appreciate about diamonds. It's not always the case. Some people do like to have those clarity characteristics in there. But when you're purchasing a diamond to be nice and brilliant and shiny, people like them clean. Clarity is the part that deals with cleanliness. Now I'll briefly go over that scale, and I'll try and put it in words that most people are going to make sense of. The most clean diamonds are internally flawless. And that means that they shouldn't have any imperfections on the inside of the diamond. As you move away from flawless, you actually have VVS and VS categories. Most people will translate these two, very, very slightly included and very slightly included. And they have 2 degrees, VVS1, VVS2, VS1, VS2. And the 1 implies the higher grade stone, the cleaner stone. The 2 is the next grade down. It's important to note, as we move from flawless into the VVS and VS categories, these are very clean diamonds. Most people are not going to find clarity issues with a VS graded diamond. Now, I am speaking to GIA's standards, so if someone else graded it, I can't always speak to that. But a VS stone and higher should be eye clean to the average person. You're supposed to need magnification for the majority of these stones. So if you see a diamond that has VS or higher, you can generally count on the fact that it should be eye clean, especially if you're dealing with a stone graded by someone like GIA. Now, after we get out of the VS quality stones, we actually get into SI1 and SI2. That's the next grade. And I pause on this because it's one of the most common clarity grades for a lot of people when they buy something like an engagement ring. Because the SI grading system oftentimes falls in that point where you can sometimes see clarity characteristics and it can look eye clean. So a lot of people settle on this particular category. Now when you get into the next category, which is your I1, your I2, your I3, many people chalk the I to mean imperfect or included, and as you might assume from that, these are your stones that show more clarity characteristics. They can look dirty, they can look muddled, they can look cloudy, and it just means they have more internally that's not your pure diamond structure. And these stones, while they can carry a lot of value, you have to be more careful. As you get into the I3 category especially, the diamond is in fact prone to breaking from those inclusions. So be aware of that. I1 can still be a very pretty stone in many cases. I2 is going to be obvious to almost everyone. I3 even more so. All right, the third C, we're talking about cut. Cut is a lesser rated grade in many cases, but it's incredibly important. The cut of the stone will show how well those diamond characteristics actually are seen, because a diamond has very nice characteristics for refraction and brilliance, and it shows fire, and all of these things that people love about diamonds can be highly and heavily influenced by the quality of cut. Now I'm going to pull out my big diamond again, and when you look at this stone, this is meant to mimic what we consider a round, brilliant cut stone today. There are a lot of other cuts that are out there in the market, but if you're looking at the cut grade, more often than not, you're probably dealing with a round stone. It's harder to grade other cuts because they're not based on that perfect symmetry, and they're not trying to maximize brilliance as much as they're trying to showcase the stone in a different shape. So when I look at a round stone, I'm looking for a round stone. That's one of the biggest things that's going to show from a good cut. But you're also looking at the depth of the pavilion, the bottom part of the diamond, and the crown. All of these things, the symmetry, the proportions, they're very scientific. And if they're off by even a slight angle or degree, that can influence how pretty your diamond is. Cut doesn't have to be excellent every single time, but you will find it is an area where the average person can pick up on it more so than some of these other areas we're talking about. When you start getting into fair and even poor cut diamonds, as the scale goes, you can definitely see a difference. They start to look flat, they just don't feel very brilliant. So the cut is incredibly important. And cut grading is simple. It goes from excellent to very good to fair to poor. And sometimes when you get into the excellent category, people will even nitpick to have everything about it excellent, meaning the polish, the symmetry, everything about that stone they want cut perfectly. And sometimes people will call these a triple X stone, triple excellent, and other branding will have different names for when they get all these things right. The point being, cut is important and it does affect the value of the diamond. The last C, number 4, is maybe the most simple and straightforward, and it's that of carat. Not carat with a K, which refers to gold, but carat with a C, which is in fact a weight. It's a unit of weight in comparison to a gram. It's 1/5 of a gram. And carat is used for gemstones because it's a very small increment of weight. 1 carat stones have been kind of a tagline for a long time now, and that's because a 1 carat stone is a very pleasing size that most people don't find too large, and a lot of people that really like bling aren't going to feel like it's too small. Now, everyone has their preference here. I get that. And because it influences the value, everyone's going to see how it affects their budget. But the carat is a pretty straightforward category because it is essentially the weight of the stone. And this is where you start balancing all of those different criteria together, because you can have a heavy stone that's not cut well and all the weight is in the wrong places. And if you just chopped off a little more of that weight, you'd have a prettier stone. That's just one example of how you can move around these different diamond criteria. And I want to spend just a minute talking about how all these things work together, and maybe you can find the best value within a diamond for the average person. So let me give you just a few examples to try and figure out how to get the best value if you are in fact looking for a diamond. And if someone were to come into our store and start looking for, let's say, a 1/2 carat diamond, early on in the process, I might be inclined to ask about budget or pricing, because diamonds can fluctuate all over the place. You can spend exponentially more and exponentially less than what a lot of people end up with. And if you're looking at a 1/2 carat stone, let's just talk about how the weight relates to it. A 1/2 carat of similar quality to, say, a 3/4 carat stone might be half the price, even though it's not half the weight. Similarly, going from a 3/4 carat stone to a 1 carat stone, you may find that a stone of the same quality doubles in price again. Now, is this unfair? Well, a lot of people that don't understand market values, or they don't like diamonds for whatever reason, would probably cry foul. And yet there's a very logical reason for it. Just as I said earlier in the video, diamonds are exponentially more rare when they become nicer and larger. And larger diamonds are that much harder to find. They're exponentially more rare, and so the scaling gets steeper and steeper as you go up. So be mindful of that. If size is important, that's going to be a heavy indicator of what you can get in the other categories. And if quality is important, vice versa, that's going to switch. You have this teetering scale that you're trying to balance. When I buy a diamond, or when I'm trying to help someone buy a diamond who wants to get a nice stone and they're looking to maximize the money that they're spending, these are some of my guidelines. I go back to the color, and I would say if you can get something in that GH color or within a color of grade of that, so we'll just say FGHI, maybe even J, and then depending on your budget and your preferences, you can make it a little more light or a little more yellow from there. But that category is kind of the sweet spot for where most people can't see a lot of color in it, but you're not paying these extra premiums for the whitest stone out there. If you get into the clarity category, where you want to stay for most people is kind of around SI1. You can get into SI2 without too much danger, but if you get into VVSs and certainly flawless diamonds, you're paying a super high premium. And if you go on the other side into the imperfect, the I1s, the I2s, you're likely to see things that may not distract you initially, because you're looking at this diamond with fresh eyes and you say to yourself, oh, well, I don't see it. She's gonna have it on her finger if this is an engagement ring for a long, long time. And there's a good chance over a period of time she will find the inclusions, and you can't unsee them once you see them. Now, it doesn't bother everybody. I wanna say that. There's a lot of preference involved in this process. But if you or the person you may be buying this for might possibly be bothered if they saw something in there and it distracted them for the whole time that they wore this, maybe you want to keep that in mind. SI1 is pretty safe for most diamonds, but every diamond is unique, and so those clarity characteristics are unique as well. But for most people, if you hover around SI1, you're going to be pretty safe in getting a good value for what you might be spending. The cut category. The cut category, I'm inclined to almost splurge and look for excellent stones. However, a very good cut diamond is just as the name implies. It's a very good cut diamond. And being so specific on those details and angles and the criteria and how they cut diamonds today, a very good cut diamond is going to offer you nice brilliance, and it is going to look like a pretty stone. So if you're, again, looking bang for your buck, you can buy a very good cut diamond, and you're not going to compromise in a lot of places. As we get to the weight, weight is something where you're not using that when you're trying to get bang for your buck. You try and balance all these other criteria that I mentioned, and then you figure out for your budget how big of a stone that is. If you're someone who wants a bigger diamond and size is important, then you have to kind of throw those other criteria under the bus a little bit, and you have to decide, is clarity more important to me than color? Is color more important to me than clarity? How big am I willing to go? How far am I willing to drop these other criteria to get a certain size or the size that I want? Now, if you're still wanting more references on the things that I spoke about, I spend a lot of time talking about GIA. You can find their pamphlets in a lot of reputable jewelry stores, and you can go online and they offer even free materials and free information for a lot of people. And they're going to be a more objective source than a lot of other sources that I know of. And yet, there's human involvement. When a stone is graded, when a stone gets sent to a lab like GIA, there's always a bit of human element to it. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. I've noticed on a lot of websites that sell diamonds, you look at it and you think, wow, that's so much cheaper than I saw somewhere else, and yet you just scroll down a little bit and the exact same criteria on the same website is 50%, 60%, maybe even twice as much or more than the other stone you saw. Well, that tells you that on paper, that diamond looks really good, but there's something about it in person that most people looking at it didn't care for. Keep it in mind, if you can compare diamonds in person, that's always the ideal situation. The big thing is, keep learning. If you watched this video to this point, thank you so much for staying with me. I know it was a longer one. My intention is to help you keep learning, whether you're buying a diamond right now or whether you just want to learn more about jewelry. I appreciate you being here. I hope that you subscribe. If you like the video, hit the like button. If you loved it, share it with someone that you think will appreciate it as well, and come back to keep learning.